If you have a scary story you'd like to hear on the channel, consider sending it my way. Just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. As a young kid, I knew that I was pretty difficult to deal with. Not in the sense that I got in trouble and skipped school and was a bully, but more so that I was very curious and tried to get into everything. My parents liked to remind me of how many child locks they had to put on cabinets, doors, even the fridge, because I would climb into everything. I even climbed over the kid gates. It was hard to get me to sit down. As I got older, the curious and ever-adventurous part of me never died. My friends and I loved to get into places that we shouldn't be. It was like finding a secret base that no one else knew about. We've explored woods, old tunnels and construction sites, and a few old buildings. But this time, we were really wanting to check out this old house that our school bus always passed by. It had caught fire a couple years prior, and was left condemned and abandoned. We didn't know who lived there prior, but the house was clearly left to fall apart. That just meant that it was a free place to stake out with my friends. After school one day, I finished my homework and chores as I was told to do, and was given permission to go out with my friends. I called up Roman and Shane and took off on my bike to meet them at our normal designated spot. We typically brought very little with us, being young and inexperienced. We knew it was probably going to be dark in the house, with no power, so we all brought flashlights. Roman brought an old backpack that may have had a hammer or a small pocket knife in it. He always had some kind of tool to help us get into places. And that was about all that we brought. Like I said, we were young and more so just wanted to check the place out more than anything. We rode our bikes down the street and around the corner to the house, and after not seeing any cars drive by or in the distance, we ditched our bikes behind the house in a small gravel area and started walking around it to find the best way in. We didn't even try the front door, wanting to stay out of view, but the back door seemed to be jammed. We did, however, find a window that we could open, and the screen was missing, so that was our way in. Roman went in first, then me, lastly, Shane. Once we were in, we realized just how much damage a house fire can do. Most of the walls were blackened, and there were spots where the walls were peeling, where it was burnt, revealing light parts of the wall. I don't know if it was paint or wallpaper. There were still charred remains of a couch, a TV stand, and a table in the living room alone. Everything we touched left a grimy, dark residue on our hands, like soot. Walking through the rooms and seeing so much stuff that was left behind was almost haunting. There was a kid's room with charred stuffed animals, now hardened from the burnt fur and warped by the water from the firemen, I'm sure. So many things that looked melted in place, like a cup sitting on a counter, now drooping over a plate. It was eerie knowing someone lived here and had to leave all of this. But at the same time, it was an incredible sight to see, and one hell of an eye-opener for me when it came to fire safety, if I'm being honest. And the smell was pretty strong too. We had a burn barrel at my house. I was familiar with the smell of burning wood, both treated and not treated, as well as odd things that I would throw in there like paper or old toys. And while the smell of old burnt wood was present, there was another pretty pungent smell that I couldn't identify. I remember discussing it with my friends, but none of us knew what it was. But we continued on. After exploring the house, it was a single floor, my friend discovered the door that led to the basement. Roman and I definitely wanted to check it out. The floor seemed sturdy, and I didn't have any worries about it collapsing. Shane, however, was not interested in the basement. Going down there with just the flashlight was not something he was willing to do. But we compromised. He stayed at the top of the stairs, pointing his flashlight at the steps for us, so that we didn't trip. We would check out the basement, and then come back up and leave. No big deal. We walked down the stairs, and it probably sounded louder than it actually was, since the house was so still. Once down there, the same but subtle smell from upstairs was now stronger in the basement. However, it wasn't bad enough to make us leave, so we started scanning the area with our flashlight. Most of the basement was open, but there was a small hallway at the bottom of the stairs, and a door on the right that we opened to get to the rest of the basement. I saw the hookup for a washer and dryer, but there was only one machine there. I saw a pile of clothing or something similarly soft close to the machine. But I remember that all of it looked fine. From what we could see, there wasn't much in the way of fire damage down there. So if those were their clothes, why would they leave them? I figured they probably didn't get to leave with much, so I would take everything that I could. Putting the clothing behind me, I continued looking at the room. On the other side of the room was where things got more interesting. There were 2 long tables cluttered with stuff. And there were a few plates and bowls with small remnants on them. Glass containers everywhere that I now know were beakers, glass tubes, giant pots, rubber tubes, funnels, you get the idea. At first, I just thought maybe the people that used to live here were some kind of scientist or chemist. It looked cool at first. I approached the table and began looking at the items individually. The glasses had a dry brown crust at the bottom. There were bottles and chemicals all over the place, and the smell was absolutely coming from this stuff. But then, I noticed the burner that the giant pot was sitting on. I reached across the table to touch it, and it was warm. It had been recently used. I was ready to walk to the other side of the table to get closer to it when Roman called out to me. By the sound of his voice, I stopped immediately and pointed my flashlight up at him. Looking at him, he looked terrified and was shining his flashlight past me. I turned back around, following his flashlight, to see a man trying to disappear in the corner. To this day, that man was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my young life. The man was mostly skin and bones. Maybe it was just the flashlight, but he looked pale. I could hardly tell that he was wearing a white tank top, as it just looked like his skin. But other than the torn-up tank, the only other thing he had on was just a pair of white briefs. From what I could tell, he either had super thin and short hair, or it was just patchy and balding. His eyes were horrifying. There were dark circles all around, and they were deeply sunken in. His eyes themselves were very large and wide, like we had clearly startled him. But beside his actual appearance, what scared us the most was the large gun that he was holding across his chest. Without looking back, I told Roman to run, and as soon as I heard him running, I turned to run myself. No sooner did I turn around, and I heard a loud bang ring out. I nearly peed myself, stumbling up the stairs in terror. Shane was already gone by the time I got up. I ran behind Roman to the window, but then I could hear the thumping up the stairs. This guy was following us. I could hear Shane shouting at us from the window. Roman was just jumping through it, and I was right behind him. I practically fell out of the window, and we ran to our bikes, ducking to remain under the windows. Once we reached our bikes, we took off as fast as our legs would go, and immediately headed for Roman's house, as it was the closest. Once there, we collapsed on the ground, trying to catch our breaths and not have a heart attack. Once we calmed down, Roman and I explained to Shane what all we saw down there. Shane said that he took off when he heard the bang. At the time, we didn't know what the home-cooked lab was down there. But what we did know was that we were trespassing and we weren't supposed to be there, and we knew that we would be in trouble for being there. So we did what kids do best. We told no one. Thankfully, no one ever brought up hearing a gunshot to us, so we didn't have to fake that. My clothes did smell a little funny afterwards, but I buried them deep in my clothes basket, hoping that it would dissipate. After that, we stopped going into places like that. If it was closed in, like buildings, we avoided it. We still explored open areas that had clear getaway points, and that we could clearly see there was no one around. We were way too young and too small to fight off adults. I did learn years later that the lab was discovered by someone else, but they didn't find anyone down there. As an adult, it's a crazy thing to think about. I always saw our neighborhood as a wonderful and safe place, but I also realized how much my parents protected us, especially from things like that. Who knows what that man would have done? He definitely chased us that day, but did he just shoot at us to warn us? Would he have actually shot us? And if so, what would he have done if he did hit us and possibly killed us? No one knew that we were there, so we could have disappeared and just never had been seen again. Just a few words of advice to anyone partaking in Urbex. Always make sure someone knows where you are. Never go alone, and identify multiple exit points. It could just save your life. Hey Raven, I wanted to share a story that happened to me and my friends back in 2012. My friends and I love exploring. The city we lived in used to be more of a factory town. The houses were old, and many of them used to be owned by the people that owned the old factory in the town as well. Many people that worked at the factory basically rented the homes from them. The idea of your landlord also being your boss is really weird to me, but that's beside the point. Nowadays, the houses are owned by individuals, such as my childhood home that my parents owned. They never considered moving, even when they expressed their frustration with certain repairs. But I also understand that they owned that place since they married, and it meant a lot to them. But as a kid, sometimes it was the uncoolest place to hang out. And since there were a lot of empty and abandoned buildings around us, we always found a place to venture into. And this story is about one of those places. Right on the outskirts of the city, there was a pretty large building where a hardware store used to be. I remember going there with my dad as a kid, and it was pretty run down then. I believe when the owners passed, their kids just sold it, and that was the end of it. Since then, it had been sitting empty and abandoned. My friends and I would drive by it, and see an unmarked police car in the parking lot, which only made it more interesting to us. If it was truly empty, then why were police presence necessary? Then, finally, no one was there for 2 weeks straight. We took the opportunity to finally check it out. We parked at the gas station across the street and walked over to the building. We went around back and my friend was able to pry the door open pretty easily. Once inside, it was pretty obvious the place wasn't that empty. Most of the stock was gone, of course, but the shelves and racks were still standing like they'd just cleared out. There were signs about the last offers they had sitting at the registers, covered in dust. From somewhere above, there was some kind of airflow as you could hear the subtle creaks from the signs swaying, which was pretty eerie when that was pretty much the only sound in there. I knew what happened to the place, as my dad told me about it, but it was kind of odd to see the place left as it was. Why did the kids sell or get rid of the inventory but leave literally everything else? I like to just see these places as they are and leave them that way, but I know a lot of people that would gut something like this and scrap and sell it all. Maybe that was why the police were there, to prevent that. Anyways, we made our way to the back of the store where the employee area was. To my surprise, they had one of the literal punch-in time cards. There was even a stack of employee cards in the organizer nearby. We went through all the cards, just reading the names and their times. They were clearly many years old, but there was still something about it that was kind of stepping back in time. Walking in at the age of 8, immediately smelling wood shavings and paint, now seeing the employee side of things, I quite enjoyed it. After we got our fill of the employee room, we walked out and towards the other side of the building. And this was where all the small hardware stuff was, like screws and bolts. There was actually a container that was filled with bolts, washers, nuts, just a bunch of random parts. Again, we just looked through all the little containers and display items on the wall, messing around and talking to each other. We'd been doing this for some time, so we were all pretty calm throughout this. Probably a little too relaxed, because my friend Faith decided to climb up one of the racks to see if she could get to the top. Oliver told her not to. I may have encouraged her, because if she could do it, I wanted to climb up there too. However, to our surprise, the shelves were not bolted down in any way, and it was almost like we watched it in slow motion as it started falling backwards towards Ollie and I. I didn't move quick enough and it fell back on me, as well as Faith, while Ollie managed to get out from the other side. I dropped to the ground, at least hoping to not be too injured, but also hoping to make a soft landing for Faith. Her head did hit me, but that rack was heavy as hell, considering it held all the hardware that it did. It knocked the wind out of me, but thankfully, Faith responded too, so I knew that she was okay. The crash, however, was painfully loud, and it had to have been heard from the outside, so we knew that we needed to get out quickly. Ollie called out to make sure that we were both conscious and okay, and asked if we could move. Faith was able to get to her hands and knees, but I was pretty much pinned where I was. The racks had backings, so we couldn't exactly just stand between them and walk out. Ollie tried to pull it, but I could tell that he was struggling with it. Faith tried pushing it with her back, and I with my arms, but we couldn't move it. We just weren't doing anything to it, while Ollie was at least able to move his corner some. Now was where we started to panic some. We didn't know how we were going to get out of this. Then, we all simultaneously stopped talking when we saw a dark shadow approaching from the opposite end of the standing rack. We were found out, and we were about to be in big trouble. He shined a flashlight at us, all of us too afraid to talk, when the stranger finally spoke. "Looks like you could use some help." Ollie immediately said that we didn't want any trouble, and said that we would leave when the guy started laughing. He stepped toward us more and shined a light on himself. "Do I look like a cop to you?" he said in a playful tone. He had long gray hair that was tied back, as well as a beard that looked to be equally as long. Wearing some old jeans and a denim jacket. He walked towards Ollie and started directing him to push with him. And with his help, they lifted it enough for both of us to crawl out from under the rack and between them. Once we were out, the man put a cigarette in his mouth and lit it as the three of us stood by and shyly thanked him for his help. He gave us a hard time, all in fun, about how we were the loudest explorers that he'd ever come across. He mentioned how he spotted us shortly after we came in, so that was pretty terrifying to me. This guy had been following us since we got in, and none of us saw him. I liked to think that I was pretty aware of my surroundings, but that all went down the drain. At any point, this man could have grabbed one of us, and we may have never known. He explained that he had actually been living in the storage basement for the past few months. I didn't even know there was a basement in that building. He explained that he knew it existed because he used to work there, and he knew the old owner of the place. We sat on the now fallen rack, listening to some of the things that he remembered about this place. He talked about how it started going downhill when the kids began managing it. They wouldn't fix some of the safety issues, and there were more than one accident that happened that could have been avoided if they fixed the highly dangerous issues. He even explained how someone lost part of their hand due to a safety switch in a saw not functioning. To be honest, some of the things he told us were pretty crazy, and scarier than what happened to us. After talking for some time, we decided that we should probably leave. We thanked him for his help, though, not knowing what we would have done if he didn't help us. Gave him some of the cash and smokes we had on us, and left through the back door. The last thing he said to us was, "I didn't see you, you didn't see me," and nodded, shutting the door. We made our way back to our car with no one noticing and went back to Ollie's to chill for a bit. The time there started out great. It was nice reminiscing, but also seeing it abandoned and quiet was eerie. And then when the rack fell, I was pretty freaked out, knowing how loud it was, that we were going to be found out and arrested. And none of us had ever been arrested. And when we saw this random figure approaching us while we were helpless, there were millions of scenarios running through my mind. But thankfully, he was just a guy down on his luck, and decided to lend a hand instead of robbing us. Or worse. And we all still like to Urbex, but I think I'm a little more paranoid when it comes to checking my surroundings. Because who knows if we'll get that lucky again. My friend Pedro and I were notorious for getting into some pretty dangerous situations. We've explored a few old and abandoned houses that turned out to be drug houses, as well as some other unsavory activities. We've trespassed onto properties that we also nearly escaped from, but at the end of the day, it was an adrenaline rush that we looked forward to. Sometimes we would take a souvenir, but that was rare. We preferred larger, dilapidated buildings. We liked to see the places crumbling and imagining what it looked like in its days of prime. We also liked to get into crevices way up high and see what we could get into. Maybe parkour, in a way. And that's where this story took place. I started dating a girl that lived about 45 minutes from me. We'd been driving around her neighborhood when I spotted a large, old brick building. It had two of those large chimneys on top and a chain-link fence surrounding it. I asked her if she knew anything about it, and she said that it was an old factory that used to make pesticides. After talking a bit more about it, she said that her grandfather used to work there when he was younger, but that it was shut down before she was even born. She knew that I was into things like that, so she just told me to be careful, and mentioned there being some underground tunnel system that they used to dispose of waste. So, that being said, I told Pedro about it, and we made plans to check it out. It wasn't actually that hard to find information on the tunnel below it. I learned that some other Urbex members had gone through it. Some people mentioned that it seemed pretty creepy and that something felt off, so that they didn't try to get into the factory. However, we were both determined to go through it. So, there we are, finally at the tunnel entrance, ready for a new adventure. After making sure that no one was around, we crawled through the tunnel entrance. The fence covering had already been cut. And once in, I was surprised to see the lights in the tunnel still working. It was nice to have the light, but otherwise, I could definitely see what others were talking about. There was quite a creepy feeling down there. There was nothing flowing through the tunnels and pipes, but there was a low humming sound the whole time. We managed to find the end of the tunnels, and there was a pretty weak lock on the door. Yes, what we did was not allowed, or really legal, so I do not condone our choices, but this is what we did. We were able to pretty easily break the lock, and we made our way into the factory. People had obviously been in here. Some things were pretty well scrapped and gutted, and there was graffiti on the walls. I assume they probably put in the locks and possibly the fence because of it. One thing I did notice as we walked around was the dull humming sound continued. Nothing worked in this factory. There was no electricity running inside as far as I could tell, no airflow, no water running, and none of the machinery worked or moved. But the sound was almost like some kind of machine. We walked around each of the tall machines, the walls, and shelves. Between the size of the equipment and how tall the factory was itself, it made me feel very small, like an ant in a giant's home. But then it started getting weird. We walked towards a large vat, and the air became cold and heavy. Something was now feeling very wrong. I'm not one to be spooked easily, but for some reason, my fight or flight started to kick in. I started looking around for someone possibly watching or following us, but the problem was that I didn't see anyone. Not even Pedro. He walked over to the vat with me, but he was gone. I called out for him, but didn't get a response. I started walking back the way we came and called out for him again, when I heard his voice clear as day say, "Hey, stop messing around, man." I didn't know why he said that, but I knew that he had to be close. I traced my steps back the way we came, and still he was nowhere. I tried different parts of the factory, thinking maybe we just got separated, but I still couldn't find him. But then, as I approached a door to what I assumed was an office, I saw a dark shadow run by in my peripheral. I quickly looked up, but there was nothing there. But the air again got colder and was almost suffocating. Something wasn't right. I couldn't find Pedro, and we never split up like that. Something or someone was in here, and the air was wrong. I called out once more for Pedro and told him that I was out, hoping that if he was in there, he would follow behind me. As I started through the tunnel, I could hear footsteps that were not mine. When I would stop, the steps would continue for a few seconds after. It also sounded like it was coming from behind me, but no one was there. I had finally reached the top of creepy stuff that I could handle, and I ran towards the tunnel exit. To my surprise, when I got there, Pedro was already out there, pacing back and forth until he saw me. He ran up to me and kept asking me if I saw it and where I had been. But I was the last one out, so where the hell had he been? He explained that he started walking towards the large vat with me, and then he saw a very large dark shadow walk between us, causing him to jump backwards. He had shouted something to me, but said he was confused when I didn't even react. I didn't look back at him. I didn't stop walking. I didn't jump. Nothing. And I told him the reason I didn't was because I never heard him say anything. He stood there as the shadow seemed to linger over me, and when he heard my voice, but slightly warped, say, "You need to leave," he didn't hesitate. He's not a big ghost and paranormal person, so I get it. He ran out of there and hoped that I was right behind him, thinking maybe I saw something in the large container. But to add to the bewilderment, he said that he never said the "stop messing around" part. He was most likely already gone, so we both heard each other's voice, but neither of us spoke. I had to admit, I was pretty damn spooked too, so we left that place. The next day I was talking to my girlfriend about it, and what we saw, and while she was intrigued, she also said she wasn't surprised. She explained that the place had been shut down because of how dangerous it was. She said the chemicals used in the pesticides they made were highly toxic, and it actually led to some of the health issues for those that worked there. A few people even died from it. However, the company said it wasn't their fault, claiming that working around it wasn't a problem. It was whenever someone tried stealing it and spilling it on themselves. I guarantee you that no one was stealing pesticides, but that's just me, I guess. Eventually, the company was consumed by angry workers and families of those that died, so they eventually had to close shop. After learning about and further researching this, I have no doubt that there are probably some trapped souls in that factory, and they were either angry with us for disturbing them, or maybe they were trying to protect us from a similar fate. Either way, it was still an experience, and the only thing that really had me freaked out. I don't think I'll go back there anytime soon, but there was definitely something, or someone, there with us, and I will never forget about it. So that, my friends, was a collection of 3 Urbex or urban exploration or abandoned buildings stories. However you wish to look at it, I prefer Urbex because it's kind of a cool term. It's one of those terms that uses the X letter, the letter X. Not a lot of terms I get to use, except for like Urbex or unexplained, I guess, also has an X in it. Because, like, not a lot of words have the letter X that involve scary stories. Like I said, unexplained, Urbex, exploration, which is the same thing. There aren't any Xerox scary stories, so can't use that one. Yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. Anyways, Urbex scary stories. Hopefully you all enjoyed the stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you are new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as I do this quite often. Have a lot of stuff coming this month, so hopefully y'all are looking forward to it. You can also, if you're feeling ever so bold, go down below the video and leave me a comment. Let me know how you're doing, letting me know how you're doing, how you're feeling, how your day's going, how your weekend has been so far, and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm done. Hopefully you're all having a beautiful day, and I hope I get to see you again here very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I hiccuped. And don't forget it. If I didn't say that already, I don't remember. Anyways, yeah, that's until the next video, guys. Much love and sleep well.